If someone had told me a year ago that my life could be bisected so cleanly into a before and after, I would have scoffed. My life was a flat line, a predictable rhythm of work, books, and quiet solitude. It was not the kind of life that accommodated seismic shifts. And then came Julian, or rather, then came the game night that changed the gravitational pull of my entire universe. It wasn't an earthquake. It was quieter, more insidious. It was the slow, terrifying, and beautiful realization that the one person I had meticulously kept at arm's length was the only one who could ever truly reach me. My world was built on routine. I worked as a rare book archivist at the city university, a job that suited my temperament perfectly. I spent my days in the hushed, climate-controlled silence of the library's special collections, surrounded by the faint, vanilla-scented decay of old paper and leather. My colleagues were quiet, my tasks were methodical, and my satisfaction came from the neat, orderly preservation of the past. My apartment was a reflection of my job. Books were stacked in careful, curated towers. Furniture was functional, minimalist. The colors were muted grays and blues, a palette designed for calm, for the absence of intrusion. I liked my life. I had convinced myself I loved it. Solitude was a fortress, and I was its contented king. Then there was Sarah's weekly game night. It was my one concession to the outside world, my single scheduled dose of social interaction. Sarah was a whirlwind of bright colors and loud laughter, my opposite in every way and my closest friend since college. She insisted, with unwavering certainty, that I needed to be demolded at least once a week. And at Sarah's, there was always Julian. Julian was not my friend. He was a friend of Sarah's husband, Mark. He was a permanent fixture of their circle, an unmovable mountain in the landscape of my carefully managed social life. From the moment I first saw him, he was an unwelcome disruption to my internal quiet. He was a contractor, a builder of things. His presence seemed to take up more physical space than it should have. Broad shoulders, hands that looked perpetually capable, a frame that seemed carved from something more solid than mere flesh and bone. He was loud, not in the joyful way Sarah was, but in a way that felt like rumbling thunder just over the horizon. His laugh was a low bark, his voice a gravelly timbre that vibrated through the floorboards. I watched him from across the room, always from across the room. He was confident, bordering on arrogant. He'd lean back in his chair, one arm draped casually over the back, and hold court with an easy grin. He was the sun, and everyone else seemed to be a willing planet caught in his orbit. I, on the other hand, was a distant asteroid, content to observe from the cold, safe dark. My feelings for him were a complicated, knotted mess of resentment, and a longing so sharp it felt like a physical ache. I resented his ease, his casual confidence that I could never hope to emulate. He moved through the world as if it belonged to him. I moved through it hoping not to leave a footprint. But the resentment was a thin veil over the longing. I noticed everything. The way a stray lock of dark hair would fall over his forehead when he leaned forward to study the game board. The faint scar that bisected his left eyebrow, a tiny, pale line I wanted to trace with my fingertip. The way his eyes, a startlingly clear shade of green, would crinkle at the corners when he was genuinely amused. This unrequited, unspoken thing was a poison I willingly drank each week. It was a form of self-flagellation. I would go to game night, watch him, feel the familiar pang of hopeless desire, and then retreat back to my fortress of solitude, reinforcing the walls he would never even know he was threatening. The distance between us wasn't just the space of a living room. It was a canyon. He was on one side, basking in the sun, and I was on the other, hidden in the shadows, studying the geology of the chasm that separated us. That night started like any other. I arrived precisely on time, a bottle of red wine in hand, and slipped into the familiar hum of chatter. Sarah greeted me with a hug that threatened to crack my ribs. Julian was already there, locked in a mock argument with Mark over the rules of some ridiculously complex board game. He glanced up when I came in. A nod. That's all I ever got. A curt, almost imperceptible dip of his chin. My heart, that frantic trap bird still did its stupid flutter against my ribs. I gave a tight, equally brief nod in return and made a beeline for the safety of the kitchen. The game was a chaotic mess of plastic miniatures and 1,000 tiny cardboard tokens. I mostly stayed quiet, moving my piece when it was my turn, offering a quiet comment here and there. I was a background character in the story of the evening, which was exactly how I liked it. It allowed me to observe. I watched Julian's hands as he rolled the dice. The way his knuckles were scarred and calloused. Hands that built things. Strong hands. I imagined what they would feel like, and a hot spike of shame shot through me. My own hands were pale and smooth, accustomed only to the delicate pages of old books. We were different species. About 2 hours in, the universe decided to meddle. The wind began to howl, a low, mournful sound that rattled the old windows in Sarah's house. Then came the rain. Not a gentle spring shower, but a violent, percussive assault against the roof and glass. A phone buzzed. It was another couple, Maria and Ben, saying their babysitter needed to get home before the roads flooded. They made a hasty exit. Not long after, Mar got a call from his sister. A tree had fallen in her yard, and she was panicking. He and Sarah, ever the rescuers, decided they had to go check on her. "You guys will be okay here, right?" Sarah asked, already pulling on her rain boots. "The storm should pass in a few hours. Just lock up when you leave." My stomach filled with a swarm of angry bees. Leave? With Julian? Alone? The thought was paralyzing. I opened my mouth to make an excuse, to say I should leave too, that I'd brave the deluge. But the words wouldn't come. Julian just shrugged, leaning back in his chair. "We'll be fine. Go," and just like that, they were gone. The sound of their car, fading into the storm, was drowned out by a deafening clap of thunder. The front door clicked shut, and the silence that fell in its wake was a physical weight. It was just us, Julian and me, in a house that was not ours, surrounded by a world that was trying to tear itself apart. The game lay unfinished on the table between us, a miniature battlefield frozen in time. The air was thick with a tension I could taste, metallic and sharp like ozone. I stared at the board, pretending to analyze my next move, though my mind was a blank slate of pure, unadulterated panic. He was just sitting there, watching me. I could feel his gaze on the side of my face, a tangible pressure. I risked a glance. He wasn't smiling his usual cocksure grin. His expression was neutral, unreadable. It was somehow worse. "Guess it's our turn," he said. His voice was lower than usual, stripped of its performative boom. It was just a voice. A man's voice in a quiet room. I cleared my throat. "I guess so." We played for another 10 minutes. The only sounds the clatter of dice on the board and the roar of the storm outside. The pretense was absurd. We weren't playing a game. We were waiting. For what? I had no idea. Then, with a flicker and a groan, the lights went out. We were plunged into an absolute, disorienting blackness. My breath caught in my throat. I'm not afraid of the dark, not really. But this was different. This was a sudden erasure of the world, leaving only the sound of the rain and Julian's breathing somewhere across the table. Well, his voice came out of the void startlingly close. "That's that, I suppose." I heard him shift, the scrape of his chair on the wood floor. "Sarah keeps candles in the kitchen." I murmured, my own voice sounding thin and reedy. "In a drawer next to the sink." I knew this because I was the kind of person who noticed and cataloged such things. "Right," he said. I heard him stand, a large shadow moving in the deeper shadows. There was a fumbling sound, then a sharp curse. A heavy thud. "Julian?" I asked, my voice tight with alarm. "I'm Fine." Just found the edge of the coffee table with my shin. And I think my anxiety, for a moment, was overridden by a different instinct. I fumbled for my phone, my fingers clumsy and slick. I switched on the flashlight, the sudden beam of white light cutting a stark path through the darkness. It landed on him. He was crouched, one hand gripping his shin, the other held out in front of him. A dark line of red was welling up from a gash across his palm, dripping onto the floor. For the first time, I saw something on his face other than easy confidence. A flicker of pain, of vulnerability. The sight of his blood jolted me into action. "Stay there," I commanded, the words leaving my mouth before I had a chance to second-guess them. I navigated my way to the kitchen, my phone beam bobbing ahead of me. I found the candles, a lighter, and in the bathroom under the sink, Sarah's ridiculously well-stocked first aid kit. When I returned, I had 3 candles lit on the coffee table, their flickering light casting long, dancing shadows on the walls. It made the room feel smaller, more intimate. A pocket of warm, fragile light in the vast, stormy darkness. Julian was sitting on the sofa, staring at his hand as if he wasn't quite sure what to do with it. I knelt on the floor in front of him, placing the first aid kit beside me. "Let me see," I said, my voice softer now. He hesitated for a fraction of a second, then extended his hand. I took it. The world tilted on its axis. His hand was warm, solid, and surprisingly rough in my own. The calluses I had only ever observed from a distance were now a tangible reality against my fingertips. The cut was clean but deep, still bleeding sluggishly. My heart was hammering a frantic rhythm against my sternum, a wild, panicked drumbeat. But my hands, to my surprise, were steady. I focused on the task. The antiseptic wipe, the careful pressure to stop the bleeding, the neat application of a bandage. I worked in silence, acutely aware of every tiny detail. The heat radiating from his skin, the faint scent of sawdust, and something uniquely him. The way his thumb twitched almost imperceptibly in my palm. And I was aware of him watching me. His gaze was heavy, intense. I didn't dare look up. I kept my eyes fixed on his hand, on the small, manageable wound, because if I looked at his face, I was afraid I would shatter. The power dynamic for the first time ever had shifted. I was the one in control. I was the one providing care. The quiet archivist tending to the strong, capable builder. The irony was not lost on me. When I was done, my fingers lingered on his for a moment too long. A spark, a jolt of static electricity seemed to pass between us. I pulled my hand away as if I'd been burned, my cheeks flushing hot. "There," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "All done. Thanks, Leo," he used my name. He almost never used my name. It was always a generic man or "hey you." The sound of it in his low voice, in the candlelit intimacy of the room, was devastating. I finally forced myself to look up, to meet his eyes. The green was dark in the flickering light, shadowed and deep. The arrogance was gone. The easy grin was gone. In its place was something I couldn't name. Something raw and unguarded. He didn't look away. The silence stretched, filled only by the drumming of the rain and the frantic beating of my own heart. It wasn't an awkward silence anymore. It was charged, humming with unspoken things. Years of unspoken things. "You're always so quiet," he said, his voice a low rumble. It wasn't an accusation. It was an observation. A question. I swallowed, my throat suddenly dry. "I'm a good listener." It was a deflection, a weak shield. He gave a small, humorless smile. "Or you just think the rest of us are too loud?" The honesty of it surprised me. "Sometimes," I admitted, my voice gaining a sliver of confidence. "You're a lot." He actually laughed then, a soft, genuine sound that was nothing like his usual boisterous bark. "I know. It's a defense mechanism." "I guess a defense mechanism?" "Julian?" The man who seemed to have no need for defenses, who walked the earth like he owned it. The confession hung in the air between us, a fragile, unexpected gift. "Why would you need a defense mechanism?" I asked, genuinely curious. He broke eye contact then, looking down at his bandaged hand, as if seeing it for the first time. "It's easier to be the loud guy in the room. No one asks you any real questions. They just assume you've got it all figured out." He looked back at me, his expression serious. "You're the opposite. You're so quiet. It's like you have this force field around you. It's intimidating." "Intimidating? Me?" The word was so absurd, I almost laughed. "I'm not intimidating. I'm terrified." The confession slipped out, unplanned and unstoppable. My own fragile, unexpected gift. His eyebrows furrowed. "Terrified of what?" "Of this." I gestured vaguely at the space between us. "Of people. Of being seen. Of saying the wrong thing. Of not being enough." The words tumbled out, a torrent I couldn't control. It was the most I had ever said to him, to anyone, about the frantic, anxious hamster wheel that was my mind. He didn't laugh. He didn't mock me. He just watched me, his expression softening. He leaned forward slightly, closing the small distance between us. The air grew thick, heavy. I could feel the warmth from his body, smell the rain on his jacket. "I get it," he said, his voice barely audible over the storm. "More than you think." And in his eyes I saw it. A flicker of the same loneliness I knew so well. The same fear. It was hidden deep beneath layers of muscle and confidence and noise, but it was there, a mirror to my own. My carefully constructed fortress, the one I had spent years building and reinforcing, crumbled to dust in that single moment of recognition. He slowly, hesitantly, reached out his uninjured hand. He didn't touch me, not yet. He let it hover in the space between us, a question, an offering. My breath hitched. My heart felt like it was going to beat its way out of my chest. This was it, the precipice. With a tremor I couldn't conceal, I leaned forward and met him halfway. His fingers brushed against my cheek, calloused and warm. The touch was electric, a jolt that went straight through me, short-circuiting every rational thought. His thumb stroked gently along my jawline, a slow, deliberate movement that made my bones feel like they were melting. His eyes searched mine in the flickering candlelight, asking a question my mouth couldn't form the words to answer. So I just nodded. A tiny, almost imperceptible movement. But it was enough. He closed the last inch of distance between us. His lips were softer than I could have ever imagined, and they met mine with a hesitant, questioning pressure. It wasn't a kiss of passion or demand. It was a kiss of discovery, of shared loneliness, of a deep, profound relief. It was slow. It was careful. It was the most honest conversation we had ever had. My hand came up to rest on his chest, feeling the steady, solid beat of his heart beneath my palm. It was just as frantic as my own. That knowledge, that shared vulnerability, was everything. He pulled back slightly, his forehead resting against mine. We were breathing the same air. The storm outside raged on, but in our small bubble of candlelight, the world had gone perfectly, terrifyingly still. "Leo," he breathed, my name a prayer against my lips. I couldn't speak. I could only kiss him again, this time with a little more certainty, a little more of the years of pent-up longing I had kept locked away. He responded in kind, his arm wrapping around my waist, pulling me closer until there was no space left between us at all. We were two separate, solitary islands that had finally, impossibly, found a bridge. We didn't talk much after that. There were no grand declarations, no promises. We didn't need them. The truth had been spoken in the silence, in the touch, in the shared breath. We eventually pulled apart, the air still crackling with what had passed between us. "The storm's not letting up," he said, his voice thick. "No," I agreed. We made a silent pact to sleep there. He took the couch, and I took the armchair, pulling an Afghan from the back of it. It was a chaste, sensible arrangement that felt utterly ridiculous after what had just happened. But it also felt right. We needed the space to process, to let the reality of it settle. I lay there for hours, listening to the rain and the sound of his steady breathing from across the room. I didn't sleep. My mind was a kaleidoscope of sensation and disbelief. The feeling of his hand on my cheek, the taste of his lips, the stunning revelation of the loneliness in his eyes. I replayed the moment over and over, dissecting it, examining it from every angle, terrified that if I looked too closely, it would dissolve like smoke. Sometime in the deep, dark hours of the morning, the rain finally softened to a gentle patter. Exhaustion finally claimed me, and I drifted into a fitful, dreamless sleep. I woke to the pale, gray light of dawn filtering through the windows. The storm was over. The world was washed clean, quiet, and still. For a moment, a blissful, hazy moment, I forgot where I was. Then all came rushing back. The kiss. The confession. Julian. I sat up, my heart beginning its familiar anxious tattoo. The living room was empty. The couch where he had been sleeping was bare, the cushions neatly plumped. A cold dread, sharp and immediate, seeped into my bones. He was gone. I stood up, my legs unsteady. The candles were extinguished. The first aid kit, was closed on a coffee table. The only evidence that last night had happened at all was the bandaging on my own finger where I'd nicked it opening the antiseptic wipe. On the kitchen counter, propped against a sugar bowl, was a folded piece of paper. My stomach twisted into a tight, painful knot. I walked toward it as if approaching a bomb. My hand was shaking as I picked it up. His handwriting was a messy, decisive scrawl. Had to go. Early job. Thanks for last night. See you around. See you around. The four most casual, dismissive words in the English language. They were a punch to the gut. All the intimacy, all the vulnerability of the night before, reduced to a polite, meaningless sign-off. The fragile bridge we had built had been washed away in the morning light. The anxiety I had held at bay came roaring back, a tidal wave of self-recrimination and doubt. I had misread everything. Of course I had. He was Julian. Confident, capable Julian. He had a moment of weakness in the dark, and I, the lonely, desperate archivist, had mistaken it for something more. It was a mistake, a fluke, a storm-induced anomaly. I sank onto a kitchen chair, the note clutched in my hand. The silence of the house was deafening now. My fortress of solitude, which had felt so threatened last night, now felt like a prison, a self-imposed exile. The quiet I had once cherished was now filled with the ghost of his presence, the echo of his voice. The absence of him was a physical entity, a heavy, suffocating blanket. I spent the next 2 days in a self-induced fog. I went to work. I stared at manuscripts. I went home. I stared at my walls. Every notification on my phone sent a jolt of pathetic, hopeful electricity through me, only to be followed by the crushing disappointment that it was never him. The silence stretched. 48 hours. An eternity. I dissected his note 100 times. Thanks for last night. What did the ellipsis mean? Was it a placeholder for patching on my hand? Or was it a placeholder for the kiss that you clearly regret? My mind, my greatest enemy, supplied endless, torturous possibilities, each one more painful than the last. By the third day, I had resigned myself to the narrative I had created. It was a one-time thing. I would go back to being the quiet guy in the corner at game night, and he would go back to being the loud, confident center of the universe. We would go back to the canyon, only now I knew exactly what it felt like to stand on the other side, even for just a moment. And that knowledge was infinitely more painful than the ignorance that had preceded it. I was making tea, staring out my apartment window at the rain that had started again, when there was a knock on my door. A sharp, solid rap, not the hesitant tap of a delivery person. My heart leaped into my throat. It couldn't be. I stood frozen for a moment, my mind racing. Don't hope. Don't hope. Don't hope. The knock came again, more insistent this time. Taking a deep, shaky breath, I walked to the door. I looked through the peephole, and the world stopped. It was him. Julian was standing in my hallway, looking soaked and miserable. His hair was plastered to his forehead, and his jacket was dark with rain. He wasn't looking at the door. He was looking at his feet, his shoulders slumped. The picture of confidence was gone. He just looked lost. My hand trembled as I unlocked the door and opened it. He looked up, his green eyes finding mine. They were filled with an exhaustion that seemed bone deep and something else. Fear. The same fear I had been drowning in for 3 days. Can I come in? He asked, his voice rough. I just nodded, stepping back to let him pass. He walked into my small living room, dripping onto the hardwood floor, looking entirely out of place amongst my neat stacks of books and muted colors. He was a vibrant, chaotic storm in my quiet, orderly world. He turned to face me, running a hand through his wet hair. I'm an idiot, he said, the words coming out in a rush. I just stared at him, unable to form a response. I ran, he continued, his voice raw. That morning, I woke up and the sun was out, and everything felt too real. And I panicked. I don't do that. Do what? I finally managed to ask, my voice a croak. Feel like that, he said, looking at me with a desperate intensity. Feel like someone actually saw me. The real me. Not the loud, stupid act I put on. He looked at me, and I felt completely exposed. And it terrified me. He took a step closer. My note was pathetic. I know. I've been driving myself crazy for 3 days, replaying everything I should have said, everything I should have done. I should have stayed. I should have woken you up. I should have not been a coward. Every doubt, every fear, every torturous narrative I had constructed over the last 3 days dissolved in the face of his raw, painful honesty. He hadn't run because he felt too little. He had run because he felt too much. I thought I imagined it. I confessed, the words tumbling out. I thought I'd made it all up, that you regretted it. Regret it? He let out a short, harsh laugh. Leo, it's the only thing that's felt real to me in years. That's what scared me. He closed the remaining distance between us, his hands coming up to cup my face. His palms were cold from the rain, but the touch was just as electric as it had been in the dark. I am so sorry, he whispered, his eyes searching mine. For leaving, for the silence, for making you doubt. I was scared too, I whispered back. I still am. Me too, he said, a ghost of a smile touching his lips. Maybe we could be scared together. And then he kissed me. It wasn't hesitant or questioning this time. It was a kiss full of apology and relief and a desperate, undeniable need. It was the rain and the storm and the quiet morning after all at once. It was a promise. When we finally broke apart, he didn't let go of me. He rested his forehead against mine, just as he had before. I don't want to be at a distance anymore, Leo, he said, his voice thick with emotion. Not from you. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a single, worn key on a simple metal ring. He pressed it into my palm and closed my fingers around it. It's to my place, he said, his voice quiet but steady. It's messy, and it probably smells like sawdust, but I want you to have it. I want you to be able to walk in whenever you want. I don't want there to be any locked doors between us anymore. I looked down at the key in my hand. A small, cold piece of metal. It was the heaviest thing I had ever held. It was a key. It was a bridge. It was a tangible act of commitment, an anchor in the terrifying new emotional territory we had found ourselves in. Tears I hadn't realized I was holding back welled in my eyes. Julian, I breathed. It's okay, he murmured, wiping a stray tear from my cheek with his thumb. We'll figure it out. Slowly, and we did. Slowly. The days that followed were a study in a new kind of quiet. Not the empty silence of solitude, but the full, comfortable silence of shared space. It started with him bringing over a box of his paperbacks, claiming his own shelf was overflowing. I watched as he placed them next to my leather-bound first editions. His world of worn, dog-eared adventures sitting right next to my carefully preserved histories. It was a perfect metaphor for us. Then came the mornings. I, who had never been a morning person, started waking up early just to make coffee. The ritual of it, the grinding of beans, the hiss of the machine, became the new rhythm of my life. We would sit at my small kitchen table, sipping from our mugs, sometimes talking, sometimes just reading in a companionable quiet that was more intimate than any conversation. He taught me how to exist outside of my own head. He dragged me on hikes, pointing out types of trees and birds. I, in turn, would drag him to dusty old bookstores, showing him the beauty in a faded binding or a forgotten inscription on a title page. We were learning each other's languages. Sleeping next to him was the biggest change. The first few nights, I lay awake, rigid with a residual anxiety, hyper-aware of his presence beside me. But he never pushed. He would just lie there, his breathing slow and even a warm, solid presence in the dark. Eventually, my body learned what my heart already knew. This was safe. This was home. I started sleeping more deeply than I had in years. My fortress walls finally, completely dismantled. My life didn't become a flat line of happiness. It became something better. It became real. We had arguments, usually over small, stupid things. We had moments of doubt and fear. But we always came back to the conversation. We had learned, in that dark, storm-tossed living room, that honesty was our only compass. I look back at the man I was before that night, the king of his quiet, lonely castle, and I barely recognize him. I thought my solitude was a strength, a sign of my self-sufficiency. I see now it was just a fear of being known. Julian didn't just break down my walls. He showed me that I never needed them in the first place. He was the plot twist I never saw coming, the loud, chaotic, wonderful disruption that led me to a truer version of myself. He didn't just enter my life. He expanded it, filling the quiet spaces not with noise, but with a presence that felt like coming home. A simple game night, a roll of the dice, and a sudden storm changed everything. And I wouldn't have it any other way. It's funny how we build these intricate defenses to protect ourselves, not realizing that sometimes the greatest risk is in never letting anyone in at all. Have you ever had a moment that completely changed the trajectory of your life? A simple event that split your world into a before and an after? Let me know your story in the comments below. I'd love to read about the unexpected turns that have shaped who you are. And if you enjoyed this story and want to hear more like it, please consider subscribing to the channel. It truly helps more than you know.